Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Tom Vanderwell, and I have a really exciting job this morning, and that is to share the story of this amazing community. Now, I am not from Pella. I'm not a Pella native. I moved to Pella in 2004 and I knew nothing about what I'm going to share this morning. And I was, shortly after moving to Pella, I was cast in a play at Union Street Players in which I was to portray Hendrik, Pieter, Scholte, the founder of Pella. Now, I was a theater major in college. I studied acting. So I did what actors are trained to do, and that is if I'm going to portray this man, I need to know about him. And I dug into who he was, and as all of a sudden, I was just amazed at the things that I was learning. And so that's where it started. And I also love history, so I just couldn't stop myself. And then I was in another play, and then I wrote a play about Scholte and his wife Maria and the founding of Pella, and just has grown. And then that's kind of what led to Wendy and I being the Domini and Maria at Tulip Time, that we did that for 10 years. And so that's kind of the backstory. So what I'm going to share with you this morning is the things that I have discovered and learned in all of that background research and diving in just because I love history. And it's fascinating. And it has the thing that I've discovered in what God is doing here at Third Church specifically. There are connections that I think are unbelievable. So I want to bring some of those out this morning. So let's start with, we got to go back to, Pella was founded in 1847. Scholte was born in the late 1800s. But we got to go all the way back to the 1600s and understand what was going on in the Netherlands that eventually led to this pastor kind of going, I have to leave and I have to take my flock to America. And it really begins with a company who, much like Amazon or Apple today, there was a company that changed the world. Anybody know what it was? The Dutch East India Company. You know that? Yep. The Dutch East India Company out of Holland began building and sending trade ships all over the known world. And they were the first to really do this. China, India, and they were, wherever they went, they would gather things that people in Europe had never seen. Coffee, tea, silk. And they'd bring them back to Amsterdam, and Amsterdam, in a short period of time, became the richest city in the world. And in fact, the bank in Amsterdam was basically the World Bank. We're celebrating America's 250th anniversary this year, and when the Patriots decided they wanted to fight England, you know where they sent Ben Franklin? To the Dutch Bank in Amsterdam to ask for money to fight the British. Now, there's a reason that Dutch are known for being frugal, because they don't make bad bets. And the Dutch Bank refused to float the American Patriots because they were a bad bet. So yeah, and this is what happened. So Amsterdam became the busiest port in the world. The Netherlands quickly became the richest city in the world, where there was the most trade, and out of that became the golden age of the Netherlands. What we think of today as Dutch culture came out of this. And there's a book called The Embarrassment of Riches by Simon Schama. Some of you know British historian Simon Schama. And he wrote, this is the definitive history of Dutch culture. And I'm going to summarize it for you today, but if anybody's interested in that, it's unbelievable. Shama said that Dutch culture came out of 3 pillars, right? So think about this. On the left is our liberal pillar, liberal on the left, and that right there is Erasmus, because there was a very strong Catholic tradition that came out of the Netherlands and Belgium and that area, and Erasmus was the great Catholic philosopher. He believed, he pushed humanism and the arts and education and all the things that came out of, the good things that came out of the Roman Church. And that's what sparked Dutch art, like Rembrandt, Van Gogh. I mean, the Dutch artists were well known. Dutch musicians were well known. It became a hotbed of the arts. Well, that came from this pillar of Catholic humanism. On the right, we have John Calvin, thank you, our good Dutch Calvinists. So think, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dutch Calvinism, think Puritans, think black and white rules, very puritanical. And so if you know anything about history, you know that Catholics and Protestants hate each other. The Reformation, just happened in 1517, so now we're in the 1600s. It's only been 100 years, and they hated one another, and in many places went to war. In fact, we still have the troubles in Ireland sometimes, so it's still a conflict. And what Shama says is that in the Netherlands, whenever Catholic humanism and Calvinist Protestantism conflicted, there was always a tiebreaker. Money, 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 money. Money. This is the richest city in the world. So here's what's really interesting. Greed is the long-term generational sin of Dutch culture. Greed. And in Dutch Protestantism, which our church comes out of, that greed showed itself by these really pious, upright Calvinists that would wear their black and white, and they were all wonderful and self-righteous. And meanwhile, through the trades, they were getting rich off of making weapons for war, fueling wars between Spain, dealing in slaves all over the world. So they're making all this money over here and then kind of self-righteously justifying it behind their Protestantism. And you know what? I'm just going to be honest. Sometimes I see that still happening in certain Dutch cultures. Isn't that fascinating? So, we have these 3 pillars. Fast forward to the early 1800s, and there's a man born named Hendrik Pieter Scholte. Now, Scholte's dad, he was born the second son. His dad started a shipping crate business, which if you're the busiest trade port in the world, shipping crates are probably a pretty good bet. Got it? So, he actually was not rich, did not come from money or riches, but he made a very successful business. Well, Scholte is the second son, so they didn't invest in him. He had to learn himself. He was self-educated. He taught himself to read. He read everything. He was incredibly smart, and he was incredibly creative. So he decided, look, I'm the second son. I'm never going to run the family business, so I'm going to study art because he loved art. So he began drawing and went to art school, learned a lot of things, and he was really good. In fact, if you go to the Scholte House Museum up on the square, they have some of his artwork, and it's really good. And so he's studying art, and then lo and behold, his father dies, and then his brother dies. So now he is thrust into having to run the family business. So he's this artist, and now he's this businessman, and guess what? He was really good at it. He kept the business going. He made a lot of money. He was really financially successful. He was kind of climbing the ladder. In the Netherlands, there was the ultra-rich, which were came out of the aristocracy and the class system, and then there was the ultra-poor. And there was this growing, from all the money, there was a growing middle class, and Scholte was kind of in that spot, but on the higher end of that middle class. So then, after a while, he decides, God puts a call on his life to go into the ministry. So he makes his fortune, sells the business, and goes to seminary. And by the time he gets to seminary, he's much older than all of the young men at the University of Leiden. Okay? So now he's a little bit older. He's got all of this worldly experience, and he enters into the system. Now, but think about this. Let's go back to our 3 pillars. So Scholte is like the uber Dutchman. Artist, he's got that pillar covered. Businessman, moneymaker, got that pillar covered. And now Calvinist preacher. He's got it all. And here's the other thing. He is amazingly independent. He is a maverick. He's an individualist. He thinks for himself. And he doesn't like to be told what to do. Which makes him, in American terms, a rugged individualist. Which is quintessentially the type of personality that settled the West. So God raises up this man who is uber Dutch and also quintessentially American. Now, we're just setting the stage. That's just the foundation. But I can already begin to see what God is doing. God is he's raising up a man. So now he's in seminary at the University of Leiden. So let's talk about the situation. Years before he went, when he was young, the church decided, or the king decided in the Netherlands that he was going to take over the church of the Netherlands, the Dutch church. Same way that the Queen of England or the King of England is the head of the Church of England, he wanted to be head of the Church of the Netherlands. So he announced it. And now the king's in charge, and King Willem decided he's really in charge. And he decides, along with his little elite followers, what the preachers can say on Sunday, and what they're going to study, and what they're going to learn, and you don't question it, and what the professors at the University of Leiden, where Scholte is, are going to teach. And so the ministers are regulated by the government. We all know how wonderful government regulation works. We've got Scholte, he's sitting here then, and he's going, wait a minute, I got a question. My Bible says that I answer to Christ alone, not to the king. So there was this bubbling movement in the grassroots that was known as the Afscheiding, which means kind of separate, and that was beginning to buck the system and say this shouldn't be a government-run church. Scholte and some of his friends at the University of Leiden decided to follow this guy. And they created a club, and it was called the Scholte Club, because Scholte was the oldest, and he was the ringleader, and everybody looked up to him. And the professors at the University of Leiden said, this Scholte is a problem. So the Scholte Club decided, we're just going to preach whatever we feel called by the Holy Spirit to preach. And they did. So what happens when you buck the empire? You're made to pay for it. And thus began the suffering. They began meeting in secret with their little churches, rural churches. They were fined. They were forcibly broken up. They were dispersed. They were made to file government permits. And they were put in prison. And in fact, they had soldiers. The king finally sent soldiers basically to Scholte's house and said, yeah, these 4 soldiers are going to move into your house. You are to provide for them. You are to take care of them. And they're going to watch you 24/7, 365. Just a little, inconvenience in life. And it's about this time that Scholte is thinking, we need to get out of here. And he knows his history, and he knows his Bible, and he thinks, I need a city of refuge. That's what me and my congregation need. We need a city of refuge. Now, let's talk about cities of refuge real quick. Cities of refuge are a biblical concept. Actually, every Mesopotamian culture in ancient times had some form of a refuge system where somebody who was accused of something could go and find refuge and, from vengeance or whatever. Well, when Moses comes along and God gives him the law, God takes the system and he makes it really intricate. It's the most advanced system of a city of refuge the world had ever seen. And so that map up there, those were the 6 cities of refuge. Notice kind of how they're all dispersed around the Promised Land. The idea that God had was the Levites, the tribe of Levi, had no land, no property, because they were the priests. God was their inheritance. So when all the tribes were divided the land, the Levites and the priests got no land. So God said, I'm going to create these cities around. And the tribes that are around there are going to build the city, and the Levites and priests will live in these cities. So it was a city filled with God's people, with God's priests. And if somebody was accused of something, I'm out hoeing my garden, and I lift my hoe and boom, hit my neighbor, and he goes down and is dead. Ooh. Well, in that culture, in that day, in those ancient times, there's really no law, there's no police, it's just vengeance. So he's dead, his family's gonna kill me. I didn't mean to do it, but he's gonna kill me. This happened quite often. So what do? You go to the city of refuge, you talk to the elders at the city gate, tell them their story, and if you enter into the city of refuge, you would stay there, surrounded by God's priests and Levites. Think about that. You're just not going somewhere to hang out. You're going to a place that's filled with God's people who care about God's things, who want God's best for you. So you are surrounded by God in the city of refuge. And then you had to stay there, surrounded, until either things were settled with the family or the high priest dies. There's all sorts of spiritual implications there. That was the ancient city of refuge. Now fast forward to the New Testament. Scholte knows his history. In AD about 65, the tension between the Jews and the Romans in Jerusalem had risen to a peak. And in fact, it was bad. War was looming. And if you go back to the Gospel of Luke and you read about what Jesus said about, hey, this temple is going to be torn down, and when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then flee to the hills, he says that. Well, it's now AD 65, and things are beginning to really get tense. This is true. So the historian, Josephus, the historian, records that among the Christians in Jerusalem, a prophet stood up and said, all Christians in Jerusalem, we need to flee. We need to leave Jerusalem, and we need to go to a city of refuge up on the Sea of Galilee, the right area of Decapolis where a lot of Jesus' ministry was. And the name of that city was Pella. So they did. Picked up their lives, picked up everything. They moved to Pella. And historians say that if they had waited and had not done that, in AD 70, when Rome marched in and destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, burned everything, and basically slaughtered everybody, the Jesus movement may never have survived. Christianity may have died in the destruction of Jerusalem had the Christians not moved to Pella. Isn't that fascinating? So Scholte's sitting here in prison, and he's got these soldiers in his house, and he's thinking, I need a city of refuge. I need my own Pella for me and my congregation. So now, Scholte dreams of Pella on the prairie. He's reading in the newspapers. There's a lot of stories and advertisements about westward expansion in America. There's land, there's opportunity, there's so many things. He's looking at his poor farmers in his congregation and kind of going, they have no future. Their children have no future. They are stuck in a caste system that will keep them poor and uneducated for generations. There is opportunity, future in America where there's freedom of religion. I can preach whatever I want. There is no government regulation of the church. And he began thinking, we're going to America. And I'm going to create a city of refuge, and I'm going to call it Pella. And he begins dreaming of it. And this is years before. I mean, this germinates for a long, long time. And he begins to plan. He had it all in his head. He had it mapped out. He knew what he wanted to call the streets. He had it zoned. Remember, he's a businessman. He planned it. He was a city planner. In his head, in his original vision, he had a business district. He had a religious district. He had a commerce district. He had everything all planned out. And this is all one man whom God is raising up to go, okay, well, then we need to meet somebody else in the story, and that's Maria. How do we solve a problem like Maria? When I moved to Pella and began researching this, it was really funny because the story of Pella and the story of Hendrik and Maria was always told from Maria's perspective. Always. Scholte was this awful con man, and Maria was this poor young victim. And in fact, I call it, sometimes Catholics will talk about, be complaining that there's a Mary cult in the Catholic Church. Well, I kind of went, I think we have a Maria cult in Pella because everything was about Maria. And I'm like going, there's a whole other story here that's not being told. I mean, I love Maria, so let's try and understand this. She had it rough, and I get it. So Scholte was married to Sarah Brandt. They had 3 daughters. Sarah dies in 1844. So this is 1844. He's moving to America in 1847. So we're just 3 years. Pella's already been germinating for 7 years. He's talking about it. He's gathering money. He's gathering support. He's trying to get everything ready. He's going to America. A woman in his church introduced him to her granddaughter, Maria Krantz. Maria is the daughter of an astronomy professor. She is beautiful. She is smart. She speaks 5 languages. She's a concert pianist. She spent much of her life in Paris. And she is beautiful. In fact, true story, in Pella, after they moved to America, at one point, the elders of the church visited Scholte in his home because the elders had determined that Maria was too beautiful to be a pastor's wife. True story. What do you want me to do? Scar her up a bit? Shave her head? What am I supposed to do with that? Well, and the other thing is that most of the congregation that came to America in Scholte's entourage were poor, uneducated. They knew very little about life or culture or any of that. Maria had a life that almost none of the women that came to Pella knew. She was alone. She was isolated. So they get married he's 42, she's 25. All right? They get married in 1845. So we're only 2 years, they're going to be in Pella. And in fact, he had to make a trip ahead of time. So in that 2 years, who knows what she knew, what their conversations were. But we do know from Maria's story that they really get to Pella. They come up to what's now Central Park, and there was a log cabin right across from the Scholte house. And that's all there was in the Tuttle cabin. There's these 2 cabins about a block apart. And they get to that cabin, and she gets out, and she says, Domini, and Domini means pastor, by the way, for those of you who don't know that. So they called him the Domini, the pastor. Domini, where's Pella? And he went, we're going to build it. And she got very depressed. So they moved into the cabin, and he said, I am going to build you a house as fine as anything you would have in Europe. And it's going to be the first building built in Pella. And it is. And it's the Scholte House Museum up on the square. Same building. It's the original. And so that's how it began. Now think about this, though. Let's think about creating a city out of nothing on the Iowa Prairie. Think about Pella. Beauty. Maria and the Domini wanted things, but Maria loved the outdoors. She loved gardens. She loved parks. So the Domini made sure there are lots of parks and beauty. And in fact, originally, behind the Scholte house from Washington to Jefferson, what is now Jefferson, that entire block of Broadway to Main, from Washington to Jefferson, all of that was Maria's garden. And she had walking paths. It was like a forest. There were pictures of it, and that was her refuge. That was her little private garden. So, beauty, art. That's what she loved. She got to see the piano. She loved to give recitals. She would arts, music. The Domini was the one who established the relationship that started what's now Central College because he believed in education. This all came out of this Catholic humanism pillar. And Scholte was the first mayor. He started the first newspaper. He was the notary republic. He was the justice of the peace. He was the surveyor. He started the first bank. He was the first postmaster. Because he was the only one who could do it all. And he did it all. And, by the way, he was still the pastor. And one of the things that happened is that the church wanted him to preach. He was a good preacher. They wanted him to preach every Sunday morning, every Sunday evening, probably Wednesday night as well. I don't know if they did Wednesday nights back then. And this is what's really interesting, is that Scholte, once he gets to America, says, well, wait a minute, time out. You know, the Bible talks about the fact that the elders of the church are supposed to help out with things. And everybody has a spiritual gift. And we need to get everyone in the church using their spiritual gifts. We need a lot more people in this church. The elders, they can get up, they can preach. We got more people that can preach than me. And what Scholte, in fact, there was an article in a magazine I read about this, that basically Scholte envisioned what Third is like today. A team of preachers, different voices, leaders doing what they're gifted to do. And it was 150 years ahead of its time. We are experiencing what Scholte wanted for his church back then. And they wouldn't have it. They wouldn't have it. Told them, you preach, or we're just going to kick you out. You're not going to be our pastor anymore. And it became a real conflict. But he still, and people, even though there are people that follow him, and then you know how churches split. We've been in church splits before, haven't we? You know, we got the Scholte people over here, and we got the people going over there. And so, conflict. But now we get to Pella, and we've got this art and beauty and education. We've got business that begins to thrive. And then we've got this city of faith. So even though Scholte is like quintessentially American in being this rugged individualist, and he really wanted to leave the Netherlands behind because he was still mad at the king, but he basically created a town that was going to be Dutch because the three pillars have always been here. Always. Now, he even created in this, so this is one of the oldest maps. Let me go back to this. This is one of the oldest maps. You can actually buy a copy of this online. But when you get really in close and you start looking at the street names, Scholte was the one that names the streets. The east-west streets from south to north were all patriotic American names. Jefferson, Franklin, Washington, Liberty, Peace, good American ideals. The streets from east to west, he named for John Bunyan's A Pilgrim's Progress. Now, if you've never read this book, it's one of the most influential books in history. It's an allegory about a young spiritual pilgrim named Christian and about his spiritual journey to finding Christ and eternity. So, Scholte said, we're going to name all of the north-south streets from east to west, because east is what? East is where the Son of Man is going to come. So we're going to start with the east, and we're going to move west. So East Third, what is now East Third, was originally entrance. And then, notice the progression here. Inquiring. I have adversity, so I persevere. I repent. There's reformation in my life. I experience a gratitude of Christ's forgiveness and grace. I begin to grow and mature in my experience. All of a sudden, the fruits of the Spirit begin to grow, and I have patience. I become confident in my faith. I then begin to have this expectation of eternity. I accomplish God's purposes for my life, and then we get to the end. And that's where he put the cemetery. Fascinating, isn't it? I think it would be so cool if, like Pella Historical, put like commemorative street signs to recall all of these. Wouldn't that be so cool? And in fact, when I had my abstract, when Wendy and I lived at 607 Columbus, I was reading through the abstract of the property that went all the way back to Scholte. And street names were actually in the legal abstract. Like, this was part of what Scholte originally envisioned. I don't know when they changed it, but I just think that's really cool. So let's think a little bit. about Pella as a city of refuge. 3 things. Number one, for Scholte and the original immigrants, this was to be a safe place to heal. They'd been suffering. They'd been hurting. They'd been struggling. The poor people in the congregation, they had nothing. So the city of refuge was to be a place where the broken could find healing, whatever that brokenness is. So as Clayton and I have been talking about it, and what does a city of refuge mean, and what does it mean for Third to be a place of refuge, I think that that's number one. Now, we need to be a safe place for people who are broken to come in and find empathy and forgiveness. But like the ancient cities of refuge, you are surrounded by God's people. So there's also an accountability that's part of it, a loving accountability. We want you to heal. We want you to be safe. We want you to experience all that God has for you. We're going to be here. We're going to love on you. We're going to be empathetic and walk with you. But we're just not going to let you go. There's a beautiful piece to how God designed that. So I love that idea. For those of you who are in the auditorium, I shared in the last service in the message, I came to Pella in 2004, and I shared a little bit about my story. It was at the end of my 17-year-old marriage that was failing. And what was really interesting about the whole story, I won't get into the whole thing, but my ex-wife was determined she wanted to move to Pella. I didn't want to. I don't think my girls wanted to. But I'm like, okay, all right, I'll choose in. I'll do this. And so we come to Pella, and as soon as we moved to Pella, it was just sort of the last straw. Our marriage fell apart, and divorce happened like within a year. And I'm the only one left. And I to this day, I look back, and God was like going, no, Tom, you need to be in Pella because I have purposes for you. And it's a safe place for you to heal from what you're going to go through. So I've experienced Pella as a city of refuge in that same way. God has healed me, and God has transformed me, and God has blessed me in ways after that. And so I connect with that whole idea. And I found that. Number 2, it's a place for journeys of spiritual transformation. And here's the thing. It's like the story of Tamar. Not everyone is easy. Some of it's messy and hard and struggles. Transformation takes time. All of these stages from east to west. But Pella is a place, Third is a place where you can find that transformation. You don't just come just as I am and remain just as you were. No, we're moving towards what God has for us. And then third, it's a place for hope and a future. That's what it was. These people have hope to do something with their lives. And when I look back at that and think about some of these Dutch farmers who had basically nothing and what they built, the legacies they have, the fortunes they built, it's huge. I mean, Marion County and Sioux County, the 2 big Dutch ones, these are like the richest counties in Iowa. You wouldn't know it from our frugality. Remind you of anybody? The embarrassment of riches. It's still the generational sin. So, some interesting facts about Pella. We talked about Maria not knowing about Pella. It didn't exist when she arrived. The Scholte house was the first house being constructed. Once in America, Scholte distanced himself from his Scholte club members. So they did this as a group. So there was a bunch of them that decided to come to America with their congregations. The biggest one being a guy by the name of Van Ralt, who founded Holland, Michigan. He came before Scholte. They were good friends. He was much younger. Van Ralt wanted Scholte to bring his people to Michigan and build a community so that they could do that together. Scholte, ever the maverick, independent, nope, I'm going to Iowa. He was determined. This was the place. So they did. From that point on, there was a separation between the two. To this day, there is tension between Holland, Michigan Dutch and Pella Dutch. And I felt it. I wrote a play called Letters from Pella, and it was published, and so it was sent to the Van Ralt Institute of Dutch American History in Holland, and they invited me to come for coffee, and coffee time, and talk. And so I went and I met with the scholars at the Van Ralt Institute, talked about my play, talked about the history, and oh man, you could just feel Scholte. All right, what was I saying? So it gets even better though. So the church, Scholte's a con man. Let's talk about that. Because here's what happened. Scholte, the businessman, he knows how all of this works. Nobody else does. So he said, look, this is how it's going to work. Everybody give me your money. And I'm going to pool it, and I'm going to put it in one big trunk. The trunk is at the Scholte House Museum. It's got a hidden secret button opening. It's really cool. And he has all the money. So Scholte decides so he's going to buy all of the land from the federal government. It has to be surveyed. It has to be platted. The government has to approve all of that before the deeds can be generated. So Scholte's like going, if we try and do this for every person, it's going to be a nightmare. I'll do it in one big chunk, and then I will deal out the deeds. Makes sense. So he gets it. He plats out Pella. Pella was actually platted. The kid who did the surveys was Henry Hospers. Ended up going to Northwest Iowa and creating his own city, Hospers, Iowa. And so between Scholte and Hospers, they platted the whole thing out. Now think about this. No internet. The nearest federal government office was in St. Louis. So now we've got the thing platted out. Who knows how long that took? And then, let's get it on a horse and take it down or put it on the steamship, go down to St. Louis. Take it to the federal office. Federal office gets it, goes, okay, well, we've got to send this to Washington. So get on the Pony Express, take it over to Washington. Now we're in Washington, and it gets into the federal bureaucracy system. And imagine how long that would have taken back in 1840s. Meanwhile, back in Pella, some poor, uneducated Dutch farmers who had been promised, we're going to this city, this land of promise, and you're going to have your own land, and you're going to have your own plot, and are going, where's my land? Where's my deed? Where is it? And Scholte's like going, he's like Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life. No, you got to understand. Your money's, and we had to do this. Just give me some time. This is the process to this. And they're like going, no. Accused him of fraud. There were lawsuits. Kicked out of the pulpit. It was a mess. It was a mess. There was one lawsuit that went all the way to the Iowa Supreme Court and was decided in the favor of Scholte. But so that created this scenario where there were people that just never forgave him. Now, eventually, the deeds came, and eventually he handed them out, and a lot of the conflict was settled. There were a lot of bridges that had been burned that got rebuilt. But Scholte never lost the reputation with some individuals that he was just this con man looking out for himself. So that's a lot of the history there. When he gets kicked, then he decides He doesn't want anything to do with the Reformed Church of America. This is interesting. Most people don't know this. Scholte theologically, across his lifetime, became more and more Baptist in his theology. And by the time he got to America, he wanted nothing to do with the Reformed Church, and I think it had to do with the fact, not only theologically, but he wanted nothing to do with the ties back to England, to Holland and the Reformed Church. So his congregation are like going, well, we're in America now, we need to become part of the Reformed Church of America. And Van Ralt in Michigan is saying, well, you need to be part of the Reformed Church of America because Van Ralt is always a big name there. And Scholte's like, no, I want nothing to do with it. This creates even more tension between Holland and Pella, Van Ralt and Scholte. So they kick Scholte out of the church, and then they write Van Ralt in Holland, Michigan, and say, will you come to Pella and be our pastor? Imagine how that would have gone over. Van Ralt goes, no, I won't, but I'll send my son. So now Scholte's rival's son takes over the pastoring his church. Yeah, all sorts of tension. Well, Scholte eventually, he's a maverick. He took his own money. He built his own church. It's, in fact, the replica church in the historical village, that's the replica of the Scholte church. He built it with his own money. He did what he wanted, the way he wanted to do it, the way God called him to do it, and he did that the rest of his life. He was an individualist. That's the way he rolled. And so there was tremendous controversy. We talked about Maria being too beautiful. He's kicked out of the church twice. And Scholte, yes, was a friend of Abraham Lincoln. He got very involved in American politics. Scholte nominated Abraham Lincoln for the presidency at the Republican convention. And he was the one who made the nomination. They wrote letters back and forth. In the Scholte House Museum, he went to the inauguration. Abraham Lincoln gave this beautiful walking stick as a gift that's still there. You can see it. So some interesting things. I just lost my train of thought, sorry. I've been talking a lot this morning. Yeah. So, I want to give a few minutes here for some question and answer. Before I do, some resources for you. Simon Schama's The Embarrassment of Riches, I mentioned that. This book, for those of you who love history, there was a scholarly work years ago led by Johann Stellingwerf called the Iowa Letters. They took hundreds of actual letters between residents of Pella and their families back in Holland, and they translated them all into English, and then they put them all into this. So this is the history of Pella from the actual people who lived it, speaking back and forth to their relatives. This is the book, I used this book to write my play, which was called Letters from Pella, because it's all first primary source material. Really cool. Hendrik P. Scholte's Legacy in the Netherlands and America by Eugene Heidemann is a great biography. You should be able to get all of these at the Historical Village. And then Vision, Conflict, and Controversy. These are all papers about Scholte and Pella from an academic conference that was here in Pella a few years ago celebrating his 150th birthday, and that's my play is in that one. And so great resources if you want to learn more about that.